Hey, good morning, everyone. I decided to do this presentation in Spanish because it's the best I speak after Portuguese, and I can do it quickly. And we don't have very much time, of course, to do this. So I am a journalist. That's how I make my living. But I have studied international relations, and my particular interest has been imperialism and oil issues. That is to say, I was kind of the other side of the, I was on the dark side, let's say. And so we're going to talk today about, let's see if I have the ability to work correctly here with the technical issues. So this is the overview of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to try to go more deeply into some points and into others no, because it's quite a broad topic. And so let's go ahead. So we're going to deal with imperialism, and imperialism means a lot of different things in political theory and in the literature, but we're going to try to get to the concept of imperialism as a new order of capitalism, of global capitalism, world capitalism. The word empire and imperialism have been used very differently. So we have the temptation of comparing these issues from the 19th century, the old to the old empires like the Persian or the Roman empires, but we're going to talk about capitalist imperialism. So the first international system based on the accumulation of capital, which is unstoppable, and based on exploitation, as always, of territories outside the most important capitalist centers. So what we have is dispossession of territories, riches throughout the world. I have a great deal of difficulty myself to deal with this, so I'll fix it here. This is this is an expression of imperialism in the United States. So along with the meanings of imperialism, we're always going to be talking about this as it has a lot of layers, but we'll always be talking about two orders or two sides of the issue. That is the territorial issue, the geopolitical expansion of that side of the concept. And at the same time, we'll be talking about the dialectical relationship with the logic of capitalist accumulation. So these two aspects are present in all the theorizations about imperialism. Both these dimensions are there, and we have to know how to combine them in the right way. That is precisely the secret of the formula of understanding this issue. So all the different Marxisms, kinds of ways of looking at this is to explain these phenomena of reality regarding how these two dimensions are linked. I'm going to speak about this little periodization or of the history of capitalism. And so we deal with that when we talk about these concepts. So this is in the discussion of international relations and international political economy, there's a huge debate about mercantile capitalism, the mercantilist era from the 15th to the 17th century, whether they were actually capitalist or not, because they were before the Industrial Revolution. For the most orthodox theorists like Macduff and other people, this would be a pre-capitalist period. It's not precisely capitalism, but to avoid this discussion, which is not very fruitful because it's a historiographical debate, let's just say that this period was very important for forming capitalism, global capitalism. We talk about this as the prehistory of capitalism, but undoubtedly, mercantilism was showed the expansion of the first European powers that Marx would talk about later. The second wave, let's say, the second moment, with the Industrial Revolution in England, and which expanded throughout Europe and then later to the United States in the 18th and 19th centuries, what we have is the imperialism that we're talking about here, capitalist imperialism. In this period, particularly from the 1870s, sorry, that's when the historians and political economists of the time and Marxists call the capitalist era, clearly the capitalist era. So we'll talk again about this, the meaning of this, and this will be appropriated by in the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, and with the expansion of capitalism out toward the other countries, outside of the industrialized countries. And here, what we have is kind of a very early definition of what we're going to talk about. So, of what we're talking about here. These statements are what? This is a question. What do you imagine these quotes are from? The discovery of America and the circumnavigation of Africa offered the nascent bourgeoisie a new field of action. The markets of India and China, the colonization of America, colonial trade, the increase in the means of exchange, and the quantity of merchandise gave an impulse unknown until that time to trade, industry, navigation, and consequently rapidly developed the revolutionary element in the decaying feudal society. Prompted by ever new markets, the bourgeoisie has invaded the whole world. It is for it a necessity, for this reason it is a necessity to penetrate everywhere, to establish itself everywhere, to create relations everywhere. This is from the 1848 Communist Manifesto. So even though our founding fathers didn't exactly talk about imperialism, they didn't use that word, these are the seeds of what their analysis would be later, the basis of the what they would call later imperialism. I'm going to show you a chronology here. So in 1848, we have the publication of the Communist Manifesto. In the 1860s,
particularmente en el Reino Unido, en Inglaterra, para propósitos políticos, ¿no? Para incentivar el nacionalismo inglés.
I don't know why I'm silenced, but here you go again. In 1868, the first volume of Capital was published. And 13 years later, Africa was divided amongst the European powers. And in 1902, in England, an important bourgeois economist who was a little progressive called John Hobson, that's his photograph there. He published a very important text for this study or for this topic, which is called Imperialism, a Study. Just in parentheses, one of the last texts of Michel Husson, who recently died, published in Viento Sur. I would highly recommend you read it. It's there are 2 articles by Michel, 2 articles about Hobson precisely, and he pays homage to him, to this economist who toward the end of his life became very left-leaning. Now, this is a picture of imperialism in Africa, in the difference between 1880 and 1913, and what it was like in 1913. In this world, the maps are important. So in this world, this is the world that Rosa Luxemburg is going to be talking about, and Kautsky, Hilferding, etc. All of these, all of the Social Democratic Party until the 1920s. And continuing with the chronology here, in 1910, this is an important Marxist from the Second International, an Austrian economist, Rudolf Hilferding, published his book, The Financial Capital. And this is something that follows up on what the previous economist had been talking about. It also in 1910, Rosa Luxemburg published The Accumulation of Capital. I'm going to explain the importance of that. And she was perhaps wrong about the overall view, but she did have important insights into this. In 1914, Kautsky, the important German in 1915, Bukharin, this has not been, it's just some kind of isolated, in other words, it's not an isolated publication by Lenin in 1916. In 1916, I do want to say that Lenin published a political pamphlet. It's not a book. It's not an analytical study. It's a political pamphlet that tries to explain what's going on in the war, and that's Lenin's objective. He writes a short text, short for the time, and he does he writes a compilation or a synthesis of all of these publications. This little book is known as the founding text about imperialism, but it's not true. As you can see, Stalinism has erased all the debate that existed. And so what we're going to do is use Lenin because he does we're going to use Lenin because he does a wonderful summary of all of the debate. And it's the summary of a huge debate that already existed amongst this generation of people. That we've never repeated this kind of these kinds of brilliant minds talk.
A lot of concentration, an increasing of concentration of capital, and of the era of free competition. Supremacy of financial capital and a merge that's because banking capital, financial capital has been existing since 13th century. It's a new kind of capital that rules the system. Today, it's not so important in debate that capital exports capital, beside goods and commodities. All these get involved in the geopolitical of power. Because there's two divisions of the world. The division of the world between the big companies and the division of the world between the big imperialist nations. And the book says that will come into war. This competition between imperialist countries and their companies will go to war. Here, I will point out the main points of classical Marxist theory on imperialism. I will skip because I don't have enough time. Now, what happens during the imperialist epoch? This is a photo of Dresde in Germany, destroyed by the Second World War, if I'm not wrong. As Lenin said, after the First World War was an unseen before destruction in humanity. Then we face the crisis between the 29 and the 33, then the rise of Nazi fascism in Europe. That happens at the same time with the decline of the British Empire. That happens at the same time. There's a transition epoch of hegemony, as theologians say. After the Second World War, we have the rise, the formal rise up as the hegemonic power in the world. In the post-war period, the so-called 30 glorious years, the welfare state, in the advanced and industrialized countries, happens at the same time with a strong wave of national liberations in the colonies. In the colonist countries or semi-colonial countries, there's a strong wave of liberation from the colonies or former colonies. And in this framework, you see two important revolutions for us, that it's the Chinese Revolution in the 49 and in the 59, 10 years after, the Cuban Revolution. Here, we start from more recent period, there's a crisis of imperialism in the 70s, a new accumulation crisis, the oil crisis, an exchange crisis, a geopolitical crisis around Vietnam War. In this moment, the United States and the central state, the Federal Reserve, hit the world when they take out the gold value from the dollar. So dollar is not linked to the gold, it's linked to the military power of the US, in fact. That happened at the beginning of the agreement of, because China now it's a post-capitalist state in that period, it's the Thatcher and Reagan's victory in 79-81 that opens the neoliberal era in terms of politics, and that gets deeper with the defeat and the capitalist restoration in the USSR and the East Europe countries between the 89 and the 91. These different actions took to the FI that in 95 to adopt a resolution to the conclusion that a new historical epoch was starting, marked by some points that we will refer now. These are these two guys in the neoliberal era. Neoliberal era take us to an intense dollarization and financial desregularization in the whole world, and deregularization of production chains, a brutal attack to the working class organizations that were strong in the welfare state period and from the developer state, as Harvey said, in the third world. The neoliberalist attack to the workers' organizations and peoples in general, it's brutal, but it's linked before everything to with the restoration of production. Because well, we will see how this globalization moment gets consolidated, gets stronger in the 90s and the 2000s, makes deeper the inequality between the powers, the distance, the gap between the countries gets deeper. The imperialists starts the war on terror that it's supposedly finishing now, as you may know, in Afghanistan, and the war against drugs that militarized life and has deep consequences in the countries that take part of the drug market in the world. And in a very short period, from my point of view, and also the fight between the now 90 and the 2000, the illusion that we should be living an unipolar imperialist, some kind of super imperialist in Kautsky style, or it didn't really happen. Here I can show to you, I don't know if you can see this map, but François Chesnay is talking about the inequality globalization, the so-called developing countries, as well as those that still had an economic and social system ordered around the state ownership, have been forced to accept the new order of liberalization and deregularization. The globalization of capital has put an end to self-concerted development practice resting on what does Chesney want to say with that? The chance of no developed countries to get the developed levels of the most advanced countries, it was not so probable before the globalization, and now it's not possible because globalization is a globalization of inequality, of oppression of the richest over the more poor and the less developed, the less industrialized countries. So you can see that he's saying that during this period of the globalization, it's been step backs in all the ways of sovereignty in the not so developed countries. Here, also with a quote of Chesney, they all come from a very good text that it's called 12 Theses on the Globalization of Capital that he made in 2005. We are looking the world poverty. This poverty in the world it's a graphic that talks about the multidimensional poverty that is related to access to food, education, and so on, and many other stuff. As you can see, the world is deeply unequal. At the beginning of the 21st century, now in the 2000s, 2000, 2001 or 2, a new era of debates starts. A debate that we would like to be so rich and deep as the debate between the Social Democrats 100 years before. But there is a debate because the world is changing, of course. So between the Marxist theories, they started to debate what was happening, if we were able or not to talk about a new epoch of imperialism. And well, here I will put some general consensus ideas, because this is a debate of 20 years ago. There's even more greater predominance of financial capital. In fact, as Chesney said, there's a financiarization of everything in life, of water, of air, of oil, of the rivers, nature. Everything gets financierized. There's a deslocalization, a strong move of the industrial to the matrix to the east of Asia, especially around the capitalist restoration in China that started from the 80s, a restructurization, very violent one, that has very important consequence in the worker's life because of production change, a reformatting of working classes because working classes are not anymore. Of course, we have traditional working class for saying so, but there are new bases of the working class, and at the same time, the union organizations get very weak. And there are also a great consensus that our epoch, it's an epoch of all inequalities, not only the ones related with class or the attack of the imperialist capital to all oppressed in the world. It gets worse, the situation of the women, of LGBTIQ communities, conditions of racialized populations, migrants, so on, get worse, and no white populations in the whole world get worse. Even a very important thinker of today, this Akil Benbien, that talks about necropolitics, that there are complete populations that have no interest for the system, for their own life even. So in this last minute, I will say the main debates that are open around imperialism in this period from the 2000 until now, in this recent period. These are debates that are ongoing. Some of them are more or less closed because of reality, but some others are still open, and it's important for us to take part in those debates and have a look on them. I selected three, but there are lots of more. Maybe you can say some others. One of them that is very important, that was opened by Hart and Negri in the 2000 with their book Imperio, Empire. It's the debate if there's some kind of ultra-imperialism, a resurrection of the debate on Kautsky 100 years before, but with more elements in reality with global neoliberal globalization, because they say that the tendency is that the national states lose their force. There will be some kind of international government, so the political organization should be in a local way, and that the work and the social classes should be taken away and use the concept of multitude. So they are thinking about the role of that nations and states has the role today of national states. Second one, I will finish, don't worry. If there's or not a new imperialism, I like a lot of David Harvey, but I don't know if there's for some commercial relations, because he made a new, in his book, a new imperialism, but he doesn't say that inside the book. What is new in the 21st century imperialism? What's the main difference between this imperialism and the ones before? And the third, it's a more difficult debate because it's related with economics, where we are in the world. It's a debate between hierarchies. There's a sector of the left, at least in Latin America, and maybe in other countries, in the north of Africa, for example, with Samir Amin. They claim that the world is still divided between center and periphery. The dependentist, is that the world? How work is not a little bit more complicated than center and periphery? So the debate is about around the new configuration, because it changes every year. It has the international state system, and I will stop here. I will just leave these ideas for us to the thinking.